Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, to the Master Entrepreneur. And if you've got a few years, a little seasoning in you, you may recognize that opening tune. It is actually from a 1960s, 70s television serial called The High Chaparral. And it was a Western series, and it was actually filmed right here in Tucson, Arizona, on a place called White Stallion Ranch. And White Stallion Ranch is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and I'm going to try and get you to get there, and get there perhaps often. I'm fortunate that my good friend Russell True, who we're going to talk to today, listen to his story, invites me often, and he would often say, well, if you're a friend of Stan's, obviously you're a friend of mine, and you're certainly welcome to White Stallion Ranch. Here's the deal. I do a number with my team and I, producing podcasts, not only the Master Entrepreneur, but part of what we do at What It Takes Radio is we are continually helping people develop the podcast for their business, for their church, their ministry, their program. And one of the opportunities I've had after talking with him for a number of years is Russell has now agreed, and he's brought along a friend, and they're going to start doing a wonderful series of podcasts that'll have stories and songs and advice and counsel, but most of all, just things to make you smile, learn a few things about the cowboy way of life, the cowboy ethos, and some of the lessons of life that we can learn when we take time to go out and see the Western view of life and go back to the ranch. Now, we did a couple pilot programs. In one of the pilot programs, I introduced our Alan Day, who lives here in Tucson, and he has been a cowboy for over 70 years. And he has a famous entrepreneurial sister named Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman Supreme Court Justice who came from right here in Arizona. He says, I'm her little brother. And, of course, he's a little brother, but he's a big little brother. And Alan and Russell have agreed to come together and put well over 100-some years of life and experience in the cowboy way of life, in ranching and entrepreneurialism. And they're going to start putting that all together. And in one of the pilot programs, I had such a great time that I just simply said, I'm going to take that little spot and I'm going to put it on the Master Entrepreneur. And so, if you'll just sit back and relax this weekend, you'll find that 25 minutes of story time with Russell True from the White Stallion Ranch will be a good break from all of the chaos and mess that's going on. If you want to smile, if you want to have some hope and inspiration and maybe a little aspiration, and hear some good stories, this is the place to be right now. The only place better would be to actually be right at the White Stallion Ranch yourself and meeting Russell in person. Why don't we see if we could arrange that? But in the meantime, you are welcome to the story of Russell True and Cowboy Up. Cowboy Up, let's go. So, take time. Get something to relax, something to drink, and just listen to the stories as we hear from Russell True. Russell True, a rancher, a businessman, horseman, and entrepreneur. So I've asked Russell to join us today, and I'm just going to say this to Russell as he's looking at me right now. Yes, just like in Star Wars. It was a long, long time ago in a world far different from today that the White Stallion Ranch began. Russell True, welcome to the program, and you're on.
I always say I picked my parents really well because I was living the typical urban/suburban lifestyle as a little boy in Denver, Colorado, where my mother had lived her whole life. My father had been born in Wyoming and raised in Montana. They both had grown tired of snow and cold, and so their life goal was to escape that and get south. And they looked at Mexico because they really liked Mexico, but that probably wasn't going to work as easily as it might. And so they looked at Arizona. They loved Arizona, loved the weather, loved the culture, and particularly Tucson. So Tucson became that destination. Story goes, came home to what he said was going to be his last blizzard. Couldn't take it anymore. He was a little impetuous. He turned around. He went back to the airport, Stapleton, in those days, and got on a plane. No advance fares back in 1965, and flew to Tucson, started his quest. The next day, he hooked up with a realtor that he'd been given the name of, and out they went looking for entrepreneurial opportunities in Tucson, Arizona. Probably 150,000 people living in Tucson back in 65, and so it was a real town, but not a big one, and so there were some options. He looked at trade schools, restaurants, apartments. And there were 24 dude ranches remaining from the over 130 that once made Tucson the dude ranch capital of the world.
There were that many at one time.
130 at least in the Tucson area. And so of those 130, it had winnowed down sadly to 24. 24. 4 of them were for sale. White Stallion was one of them. And so anyway, my dad looked at all these things, including these 4 dude ranches, and just absolutely no preconceived idea he wanted to be a dude rancher. He goes home, gets my mother. I was 5, so I got to come along. And so we stayed for a week at White Stallion Ranch as guests. We were dudes. And so at the end of the week, my mother, who was pragmatic and far from impetuous, said, "Alan, this is the worst idea you've ever had. We don't know how to run a dude ranch. I know you were a wrangler when you were 12 for 3 months in Glacier Park. That doesn't make you a cowboy. And when you were 13, a hotel manager. And so we're barking up the wrong tree. And so my dad knew when he had to strategically retreat, and so he did. And so he took her back on this big journey that he'd been on, looking at all these boring businesses and probably much better businesses, but far less interesting, I'm sure. And so finally at the end of the week, my mother, as she repeated herself for the rest of her life, she said, "Well, Alan, if I'm going to look at those mountains to the south every morning when I wake up, I'll let you throw our lives away." And she meant it. And, my dad more than anybody in the world knew that my mother had no sense of humor, so when she said it, she meant it. And so he built her a house that had floor-to-ceiling glass all across the entire south wall. So she had her absolute complete view of Panther and Safford Peaks, part of the Tucson Mountains. And they're like mini Tetons, they just rise out of the ground just pretty dramatically. And of course have been in at least 31 films that we know of from the ranch and all kinds of TV shows. So they're pretty dramatic. And so as my mother came to work in that house. So the house had to be built, to kind of back up a little bit, because the prior owners, the dude ranch had been here since 1945. It was a cattle ranch back around 1900. The guest ranch.
So it's a real long-time ranch.
It's a real old cattle ranch. Actually, it was like a lot of ranches in Arizona. It was actually a squatter's ranch, which means that somebody just found a spot, drilled a well, started running some cows, built an old adobe and some corrals, and started running cows on federal land. And so right around the turn of the century, the federal government created the Forest Preserve Act, and that was to protect what they viewed was the better land within the within the federal system. And anything that didn't get put into a national forest just sort of laid in limbo. It was still owned by the feds, but it was unregulated, unmanaged, pretty well unwatched. And so people would go out and run some cows on this sort of on its own kind of property. And so that's what this was. It was what ultimately became BLM when the Taylor Grazing Act in the 20s was passed. And so a man named David Young homesteaded the ranch and then quickly, once he proved up, meaning he got the deed, then he sold the ranch. And then it went to a couple of cattle ranchers, and Max Zimmerman bought it in 1945. He had the largest liquor store in the world, 1 square block on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. They said if it had alcohol in it, Max sold it. And Max ultimately got to be known as Max the Hat Zimmerman and died in the 80s, I think. So they added to the old mud adobe, and the room I'm sitting in now is part of that. He had bedrooms for his 3 boys, and he had an office, and started the dude business, built the first, what are now rooms 1 through 12. And so that was the Dude Ranch beginnings, 1945. 1958, a couple from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, bought it, and they renamed it White Stallion. In the interim, a couple of sisters had owned it. So they renamed it White Stallion. They named it White Stallion because they were going to call it Black Stallion, but Black Stallion, they hadn't thought this out. Somebody made him a bolo, has the initials of BS. And poor Brew Town, when I met a man in his 80s who was there. He said, Brew's eyes rolled back in his head, and he just couldn't imagine all these bolos and cattle with brands BS all over. So he said, well, that ain't going to work. So they changed the name. No great story, just bad initials. We became White Stallion Ranch in 1958. And then along comes my dad and my mother, 1965. So the Towns, they were older couple, no children in the home, so they were living in one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom in the main lodge close to the bar, which is always good if you're in dude ranching. And so that wasn't going to work for a family of 4. My mother was pregnant with my brother Michael. So my dad builds a house, the one with the glass, and we moved down. My dad ran the ranch. They closed on the ranch in September of 65, opened it in October of 65. We moved down in March of 66. And so I was 6 by the time we actually began our adventure here at White Stallion. And I sat and watched as my parents just worked. They had no business. My mother was right. They had no business buying a dude ranch, but they had the 2 things you really needed, and I guess 3. They had a work ethic. You don't have a work ethic. If you think you're just buying yourself a host job, you're wrong. And they had, they were smart and they figured out how to do it. And they were interesting. In my dad's case, a great, funny storyteller. And, my mother, who wasn't funny, you only need one comedian in a family anyway. She had this great grace and dignity about herself. And so people saw him, the younger people saw him as their parents, almost sort of de facto second family, and the older people who were more their contemporaries or even older than them saw them as interesting equals who were living this sort of unbelievable but interesting life. And so back then, dude ranching was all consuming. You lived there, you started the day early and you did all the different things that you do. And then what probably was the hardest and consumed my parents the most, I think, over time, was they were the consummate hosts. And I think I could probably count on 2 fingers the numbers of dinners that they did not attend with their guests. And there was a sort of a very consistent tradition of how it all went. And my dad sat at the head of the table and he welcomed the guests who were coming in, and then he would say goodbye very sincerely, sadly, and everybody would, oh, and these people are leaving. And then he would tell them what was going on the next day, if it was a cookout or or if there was this or that entertainment, and then little children, if there were any on the ranch, would come up and they would say dismissed, and dinner was over. If you left dinner before dismissed, your hair better be on fire or your bladder very, very full, or else you were frowned on and looked askance at, because it was just in an informal way. Sounds contradictory. It had a very formal tradition about it.
You know, tradition is very important. And by the way, you are involved in a new tradition. This is called Cowboy Up. It's brought to you by the White Stallion Ranch, the Dude Ranch Association of America, and I'm Stan Houston. I kind of lead the What It Takes radio game. Hey, we want to hear from you, and we want you to be involved in everything we do. Okay, Russell, now, there you are. And that was a wonderful story of how a family begins to build a business. Hard work, full hospitality, and of course, making people feel special. Tell me more now about White Stallion today, that you and your family still run, and I think we're on generation 3, maybe 4. Where are we going? Who knows? Tell us more. What's it like today here at the White Stallion?
Well, before I go to today, I'm going to step back and sort of finish my thought, because as my parents, after dismissed and everybody felt finally free to leave their seats and get up from dinner, then they would, back in those days, as my parents often reminded my brother and I, children are to be seen, not heard. And that was a pretty consistent cultural philosophy. So
that was the deal.
That was the deal. And maybe it had its merits. But as dinner ended, if there were kids on the ranch, because we were a winter operation, October through April at that time. So if kids weren't out of school, they weren't at the ranch unless something odd was going on. And so if there were kids, then they would go out and self-entertain. They'd go play capture the flag or whatever they were doing, but they were kind of on their own. It was one of the beauties of a dude ranch. Kids could kind of be set free. And then the parents would go play bridge. My parents were big bridge players. Blackjack. My dad sort of frowned on poker because sometimes the pots got a little heavy but very little entertainment back then, because frankly it was smoking, drinking, socializing, and card playing. And if we had a singer out, sometimes it was annoying to people because, they couldn't hear their bridge bids as well as they wanted to. And so that was the culture of the time.
Right.
And so today it's very different. And my mother ran the ranch alone after my dad died, and so she took on that sole host role, and some of the guests who still come, she's been gone since 2001, they still remember her, and everybody always talks about her great dignity and just the grace that they felt from her, and
that's a good memory, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And she's definitely in their memories too, if they knew her. She was pretty unforgettable. And so when she died in 2001, my brother and I are equal partners, and I always say that, and I mean it actually, that I make the ranch look like it runs, and my brother's the one who actually makes it run. And he's the guy behind the scenes that makes all the logistics happen, and he's the guy who lives one of my parents' main dude ranch mantras, which was make everything look like it isn't happening. And what they meant by that is, if it's supposed to be a buffet, the buffet should be there when the guests get there. There shouldn't be a bunch of scurrying around, or there shouldn't be all this, oh, look at us, we're so busy taking care of you. It should be, wow, look at that. It's ready. Look at that. It's gone. Wow. What happened to the dishes? They're gone. And that was always our thing. And my brother's the one who does a brilliant job making that happen behind the scenes. And so I was always more the face of the ranch, and, life or fair, but it's just the way it is. So when my mother was gone, I thought, well, I've got to try and assume some of her roles, and I didn't have her age, life experience, grace, or anything else. And it took me about 2 weeks to figure out that I was going to fail miserably at that, and also fail at my job, which was managing the riding and the activities and doing all the things I'd been doing while she was alive. And so I just quickly abandoned that and went back to doing what I'd done before, and hopefully doing it well. I guess I did it well enough. We're still here. And so the ranch today is very much the same and in many ways completely different. And I'll say that I often get the question, because we try and think out ahead of ourselves, and so people say, well, what's next? What's your next big plan here at the ranch? And it's an obvious and good question, and my answer is usually, I don't know. We might have some short-term plans, but I don't know what's next, because the guests are going to tell us what's next. I can't imagine 20 years ago even imagining that we would have to have all this bandwidth and internet access, wireless internet access for our guests. I mean, it's, my mother thought the internet had its origins in hell. And so, I don't know what's next, but what I do know is that we've done a reasonably good job of adjusting to the culture without abandoning what the Dude Ranchers Association very appropriately holds dear, which is horses, hats, hospitality, heritage, heart, and honesty. And those are the 6 H's that we just absolutely live by. And I think any dude ranch that's worth visiting is a Dude Ranch Association member that holds on to those things. And so we never lose sight of those, ever. But we adjust. And so today, it's not smoking and drinking. Of course, smoking's pretty well frowned on today. Drinking is different. It's much less, and it's not Jack and Coke. It's a beer or wine, and people want to be entertained, and they want an educational component to that. And so we have entertainment every night, and some of it's just go out and dance, country lines dancing style, or it's a great country singer around a bonfire. But other nights it's learning about nature or our unique desert or history or archaeology. So we've adjusted to the culture. And the other thing is, dude ranches obviously are built around horses and cowboy and all those sorts of things. And so when we started, kids and adults, certainly me and people older than me, had grown up watching Westerns, whether they were John Wayne in the movies or James Arness in Gunsmoke, and High Chaparral, of course, my favorite because it was filmed here for 4 years.
We'll talk about that someday.
Yes, we will. And so I grew up watching High Chaparral film, learned very quickly that watching filming done is about as exciting as paint drying, but we can talk about that another time. But, we grew up on the cowboy movies and television, and so that was a very big motivator for people to come out west and experience the ranches. And as Star Wars replaced cowboys and whatever replaced Star Wars, the culture shifts, and horses became a very central theme in people's dude ranch quest. And so nothing really changed. It's just the motivation changed. And still cowboys and cowgirls, a lot more cowgirls today, and that's pretty cool, on dude ranches, meaning both as employees and guests. And so horses and cowboys take you to the same place, but horses became a core theme. And then dude ranches like White Stallion that try and reach out to a little broader spectrum. We have really nice rooms, nice facilities, nice entertainment activities, etc. Facilities, etc. We added some more activities. So talking about today, we're a lot more diverse. You know, we have rock climbing up real mountains, expertly guided from beginner to advanced, 37 climbs, largest private destination in the U.S. We have e-bikes. So if you don't like or you're afraid of horses, you can get out into the desert, and these bikes have power assist. So if you're not in biking shape, that would be me and probably a good share of our guests. You can get out there and keep up with the young, fit biker types, bicycling types. And then we have a variety of shooting from 22s that are a really good way to start shooting a gun to 45s and archery. So along with all our incredible variety of riding and all the things we do, from breakfast rides to all-day rides to fast rides to up the mountains to going out and finding a table spread with wine and cheese at midway of your ride. We have a lot of other things that people can do and enjoy our really spectacular desert. We're next to the national park, and you can't really tell where the national park starts and where the ranch ends, except for the fence, and because it all looks the same. So we're evolving, but we will never ever lose sight of those 6 H's that the DRA and we believe so much in. And the experience around the edges may change a little bit, but the basics will never change.
Thank you, Russell. Let me just add 3 S's to the 6 H's. First of all, the sight of just being here in the big sky and seeing what it's like is really wonderful. And you will hear stories. Remember, stories are the basis of life and civilization. And you will hear stories. And there are thousands of stories and films and movies that came out of White Stallion. And the final S for me is just exactly what my wife said to me when I left this morning. She said, "You're going to the ranch today." And Russell, you know what she said to me? She said, "I'm glad. That's good for you. That's good for you." And it really is. There is a spirit here that oftentimes in the midst of life, when I need a sense of encouragement, I just need to feel differently and feel that I'm a part of life and history and of God and goodness, I just say, "Russell, can I come out to the ranch today?" And Russell will say probably to you as he would say to me, "Anytime, Stan. Just come." So you just come to White Stallion Ranch. Russell, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And this is all a part of learning what it's all about on Cowboy Up. Now, wasn't that a far better way than spending a half hour listening to the noise and news of the day? And so I would encourage you, please reach out to me. I would be glad to direct you and recommend for you a place at White Stallion Ranch, and something that the Dude Ranch Association of America and we are putting on, and you will love our weekly program called simply Cowboy Up. We'll be letting you know more about that. So, reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. Hey, go in and Google, Bing, or whatever else you do, White Stallion Ranch, Tucson, Arizona, and you'll find the place where you should really go, and plan on it this summer, because they'll be back and ready to help take care of you and show you an experience that you probably never had before. And You and your family will find it very good, very different, and certainly different from Disneyland, and certainly something that will bring some life and history and joy into your life. Just do it. White Stallion Ranch. Again, my name is Stan Houston, and the program you've been listening to is the Master Entrepreneur, and we encourage you to join us whenever we're on, which is 2 or 3 times a week, and we'll continue to help you figure out how we can do life and business better in the midst of kind of the mess we're trying to get out of, and we plan on having some cowboy courage and some cowboy tips and some good ways to do just that. We will make it. It will be okay. We're pressing on. We're saddling up and moving on. Please join us, and please share our story and what we do with others. We would be grateful partner. Bye for now.